Okay, so welcome everybody to the day two of CityDAO's first academic conference, the first annual academic conference. Yesterday, day one, was a lot of fun and very interesting. A lot of great ideas got discussed and presented. Really enjoyable. I look forward to day two. We have a wonderful keynote speaker. Then we have a series of 5 different presentations of projects and papers, some very innovative stuff. Then we'll have a panel on the future of K to 12, kindergarten to 12 education, since yesterday was primarily focused on higher ed and university. And then we'll have a roundtable discussion which will be about the future of Web3 education with a focus on CityDAO University and what that could look like. And then we'll close out the day with 2 keynote speakers who are both kind of like TV personalities in some ways, who are futurists and physicists and scientists. And so we're very honored and pleased to have our opening keynote speaker for day two of our first conference, which is Scott Meyer, who is the founder of ed3.gg. And the floor is yours, Scott.
Incredible. So great to be here, everybody. I am excited to probably be the first person you've ever met from Fargo, just like the movie or the TV show. So it's an actual place. I live in Fargo, which is the hub of Web3, of course. Everyone has been here for all the conferences and events. No, we're building it. But I think what's amazing right now is that you can be in Fargo, you can be in Oaks, North Dakota, you can be in Oakland, it doesn't matter. And you have a chance to really create this future. And I want to speak today a little bit about educators and the importance of Web3 and education, which is kind of how I got started in this great journey. I spent a decade as an entrepreneur and then got into higher ed, and at the same time had a personal passion in Web3. And I saw this obvious overlap of how Web3 could really help us create a better education system, to become better teachers, actually become better at our craft, and create opportunity. And so I wanted to share some resources and some links and some ideas here today, and really start a discussion, hopefully, on the role of Web3 in education and what it should be. So, I think all of these conversations always end up going to kind of the core belief of like, what is education for? And this is a discussion that is as old as time, right? Where there's not a right answer, but there's a lot of divergence of what is an education for. Is it to just grow someone's mind and what they're able to think about, learn how to learn, essentially? Is it to create job opportunities and wealth? Is it to connect them with new people? Is it to build a culture and a community? Is it to level set opportunity? There's kind of all these different reasons. And the way I really approach this question is that, to me, education is about creating human flourishing, allowing people to flourish. So that could be opportunities. If you're looking for economic growth, it could be learning new things or finding their path. And if you're like me, you maybe grew up in a place that didn't always have a lot of opportunities. I grew up in a rural community in South Dakota, and you ran cross country, you played football, you did track. There was a lot of options, right? But if you were someone who was really into anime, or if you were someone who was really into skateboarding, or you were someone who was, I don't know, really into pickleball, that was not a place where you found a lot of your weirdos. And that's really what I like to think about it. I like to say, Seth Godin's book, one of my favorite, is We Are All Weird. And what's beautiful about the internet generally, and Web3 specifically, is the weirder you are, actually, the easier it is to find the people that you want to connect with, right? When your name is Scott Meyer, it's really hard to find me, right? When you're into, if you're selling shoes, if you're a shoe store, it's really hard to show up. But if you're a shoe store that specializes in yoga shoes for people who are overpronating, like, that's going to be a lot easier to stand out. If you're going to start a city with a decentralized community, like, people are going to start talking about you, right? Because you're weird, you're doing something unique. And so what I'm really excited about is this potential of Web3 overlapped with education, what I'll call Ed3, really unlocking individuality, the ability for people to pursue their individual interests and get credit for that and turn that into opportunity. And so I kind of see 3 big areas that we want to talk about today, which is, first of all, how Ed3 can help us as educators, right? So how can we just do our craft better because of Web3? It's not even that we have to teach Web3, but we can use Web3 as our tool, right? The second thing we want to talk about is how we can actually build a better education system. So how can Web3 actually improve the foundations of this education? And third is how can Ed3 really create opportunity? So what does this mean for preparing students and ourselves for this brave new world? So I'll kind of dive into those three areas, and I'll stop after each one so we can have some questions and discussion, but I'll drop a lot of links in the chat as we go, so that you guys can hopefully continue researching and finding things. So first, let's talk about the art of teaching itself. One of the things that teachers love to do is to encourage students to think by putting them in situations. By a lot of times, this is done with case studies, right? Like the famous HBR case study, where we say, "Here's something that happened in the real world. How do we interpret it?" Right? Or we read a story in our English class, and we ask students to put themselves in that situation, or we reflect on our own experience. One of the biggest powers of Web3 is it brings this world of case studies into the classroom, because all of a sudden, regardless of what you teach, Web3 gives you not only a hypothetical case study, but a real world case study that's happening in the moment and that iterates in an incredible speed. And so if you think about, if you're an economics teacher, you're teaching students about supply and demand, what better way to demonstrate supply and demand by looking at NFTs or cryptocurrency, right? These are case studies in the moment that we can look at what happens when you have a drop of tokens from the people who initially got them, right? Or the original owners all of a sudden get all this supply. What happens to the price, right? It's really easy to have students learn from that. And it's really exciting because it's something that's actually happening. We don't know how it's going to end. One of the things that I teach often in the classroom from elementary all the way up to college is the concept of money, right? Financial literacy is something that a lot of people talk about that's important for our students. And what better way to teach financial literacy than thinking about what does a bank do, right? Like, how do you transfer funds in the current system? And Web3 obviously provides a counter to that. Like, if you're going to be your own bank, if you're going to be able to send money in a trustless way, Web3 allows you to do that. And what does that mean? What is value, right? Like, why does money have value? So oftentimes with educators or with students, I talk about the Kula ring, which is, this idea that that Mouse looked into in the 1950s, which was essentially where people would exchange rings and shells in Polynesia as a way of showing value, right? It was like the gift economy. And this is a great a great idea to share with students, because it shows that value is really how we interpret it, right? And Web3 allows us to explore that idea in the real world. Now, if you're teaching social studies, psychology, political, or maybe U.S. history or government, like, what better way to talk about governance than using DAOs, right? Like, this is an active, real-world scenario where we're talking about voting, talking about making decisions, and this is a place that we can really look at what government is and what voting is. And I think the article from Packy McCormick called "Go Fork Yourself" is a great example of how we can take these concepts of Web3 and apply them to old school governance and learn, right? So if I'm teaching these concepts, what better way than doing this? Right now, I'm involved in a project with Stanford and Leticia, who's a professor at the design school. And that's exactly what they're looking at, is how can we use DAOs and Web3 communities as a way to explore topics and almost expand research. So it's not only in the classroom, but if you're a college professor, a lot of your job is often research, right? And these Web3 communities, these Web3 projects provide in the moment research that you can do. You can actually, everything's transparent, so we can go look at the data. So there's a lot of potential for Web3, I think, to revolutionize the classroom. And it's not that you have to convince your students to like Web3, or even you as a teacher have to use Web3. But that Web3 provides you that case study that's going to be more exciting, more dynamic, and actually a real world scenario. One of the projects I'm really excited about is a DAO that's called Ed3 DAO that I'm a part of. And they've just built the first curriculum for teachers. So Ed3 DAO is a DAO built for teachers, by teachers, and they're trying to onboard 1 million educators to Web3. And so what they've built now is a curriculum to train teachers on how to teach Web3, right? So they take a look at cryptocurrency, they took a look at what blockchain is, they took a look at the metaverse, and they take a look at DAOs and collaboration. And by teaching teachers these concepts, what we're finding is that there's a lot of ways to implement it. So the educators who take this curriculum, their final project is to create a project for their students to explore one of these topics. And what we've learned through creating this curriculum is that it's not about teaching the Web3 concept, it's about teaching the core concept that Web3 is built upon. So teaching supply and demand, teaching what value is, teaching what a vote is, right? And so these are really big ideas that I think Web3 helps us really explore in a powerful way. So I'm really excited about teaching and Web3. So I want to take a quick pause and just, if you want to throw in the chat any questions, or if you want to jump on mute and ask, I'd love to see if there's any educators in this room and see if you're using Web3 right now as a tool, and any thoughts on kind of that aspect of the potential. So I'll take a quick pause and see. I see Armad's nodding, maybe. Mike, Grandpa, I know you're there. So any use cases you've seen? Yeah, what does the metaverse have to do with the underlying principles of Web3? So I think in the curriculum, what we found is that a lot of educators are trying to figure out what's the best way to teach when you're not in the same space, right? So kind of the Zoom room sort of started this movement with COVID, and a lot of schools are experimenting with things like GatherTown, where you're actually meeting students in the metaverse. So what the metaverse unit does in the Ed3 educators is kind of talk about what is collaboration and how do you collaborate with students, and then looking at it forward thinking. So in the future, what does this mean for work? What does it mean for relationships, social relationships? So that's kind of the approach that curriculum takes. That's a great question though. Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know how
Can I ask you
interactive
a
we want to
question?
be. So yeah, go for it, David. Yeah.
You mentioned the gift economy and you referred to somebody I just heard of but hadn't read named Mouse, right?
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
wondering if you could just expand on that a little, because I just heard of this person, right? Thank you, Mouse, Mauss, and the studies of shells or something. I'm curious
Yeah.
how that kind of relates to education.
Yeah, I think this is really a foundational concept that I don't see a lot of people talking about in Web3. But there's basically a debate between Mouse and Malakanowski, I think is how you pronounce the other researcher's name, and it's essentially this idea of like what is value. And the way they looked at it is from a social anthropology lens, and they went and lived among this group in Polynesia, and basically what this group of tribes did in these islands was one tribe would bring these shells to another island and give them these beautiful things and not ask for anything in return. But naturally, the tribe that received these shells then felt an obligation to return the favor, and they would then bring other gifts to this tribe. And so it was this entire economy built on gifting. And when you think about our own society, there's a lot of gifting economy, right? Like when you go eat dinner, you're bringing a bottle of wine, right? You don't have to, but it's sort of an obligation, right? And this even extends out when you think about the creator economy and what does it mean to like something or share something or retweet something. And I think a lot of these ideas of obligation or repaying actually underlines a lot of our social interaction. And so I think this research paper touches two big areas, which is kind of the psychology of the creator economy and also the concept of value. So something can have value even if it's not, even if it's shiny rock like a gold, right? Like that can have value because we believe it is, even if it doesn't have like intrinsic value where I can use it for something. So really interesting papers to look into, and a big debate, right? So like that kind of sparked a whole branch of anthropology, and I'm not nearly an expert in it, but did a little bit of research in my master's program. And I think it's something that we should teach students, because Web3 really helps us explain that value is self-imposed, right? Like it's really easy to look at these tokens that are created, cryptocurrencies, and say, there's no reason this has value except we all believe it has value. Just like there's no reason a shell has value except we believe it's a fancy gift, or there's no reason a bottle of wine is an equivalent to getting a meal, right? There's no reason I have to spend $150 per person going to a wedding dinner, right? Like there's all these things we have kind of in our mind. And I think that is an interesting concept for students to explore. And a good way to do it is with Web3. So yeah, great question. Yeah. Cool. Well, I'll keep going, but love these questions. I got the chat open right here, so I'm going to be dropping links. Feel free to ask your own questions. So that was a little bit about using Web3 in the classroom, and I do think that it's a great opportunity. It's a great tool. So even if you don't want to adopt Web3 personally, or your school or students don't want to, like, just use it as a tool. The second thing I think Web3 provides is a chance to build a better system. And when you think about if the goal of education is human flourishing, there's a lot of people who aren't flourishing right now. About 600 million students around the world are below standards in reading and math at 4th grade and 8th grade. About 7% of the entire world has a secondary degree. In the United States, it's less than half, right? So a lot of people don't fit into our current education model. And for the people that do, I think it's great. I think the best way to be educated is like have a private teacher. The next best way is have a teacher for 10 students. The next best way is one teacher for 50, right? It's always going to most likely be better by having individual education, but realistically, that's not going to happen. There's a lot of communities where there aren't educators. Where I live in North Dakota, about a third of the schools don't have enough educators for core subjects. So they're outsourcing those to people like ASU Prep or Outlier, where they're taking classes online and they have one teacher who walks around and just makes sure the students are on their computers, right? So they can't actually get a US government teacher or an economics teacher. They basically have a science teacher, a math teacher, and outsource everything else. So I think the question is not, are we trying to replace what we have with something else, but how do we add additional education to our system? And I think about this as what I call AAA education. So accessibility, affordability, and accreditation. And so I think with Web3, we can build an education system that is better accredited, that's more affordable, and that has more accessibility. So I want to talk a little bit about how we kind of get there. So I think the first thing is to kind of explain how the system currently works. So I just put a link to a Twitter thread all about the Carnegie Unit. So if any of you are in education, you're probably familiar with this term, the Carnegie Unit, which is essentially why do we have credits, right? Like, why do I have to take a 3-credit class, and why does it last 16 weeks? And why do I have to do X number of hours per hour in the classroom, whatever it might be? The real answer is the railroad. So Andrew Carnegie, obviously the railroad magnate, he wanted a way to have set education for people who would come work in the factory. And at first he created the system, which came to be known as the Carnegie Unit, which is essentially X number of hours equal X number of credits. You have to have so many credits to then get a degree, but no one adopted it because all the teachers thought that their classrooms were unique or individual. And so he did this really tricky thing, which is he put a bunch of money in a pot and said, we will pay for your teacher's retirement if you adopt the Carnegie method. Within about 3 years, 90% of the universities across the country had adopted the Carnegie method. And what blows my mind is when I was an educator at a university, I actually got my retirement from the exact same company that he started, which is now TIAA. So if any of you get your retirement from TIAA, that's actually the company that Carnegie started to get people to adopt the Carnegie Unit. And what's amazing is that the Carnegie Foundation today is telling people we should not use the Carnegie method. So even the Carnegie Foundation says this is a horrible idea, but it's so ingrained, it's really hard to break out of. And what I think Web3 can do is give us an opportunity to pry that open. There's some movements happening right now in education. So I'd recommend checking out CBEN, and I didn't have that link immediately at my fingertips here, but CBEN is working on competency-based education. Some people call it skills-based education. There's about 50 universities in the United States right now that accredit based on competency, which basically means, I have to be able to understand macroeconomics and I get credit for that. And then some microeconomics, and I get credit for that. Instead of taking an economics course, and maybe I'm really good at macro and really bad at micro, but I get a C, right? I pass. And as an employer or as the professor in the master's program, I don't actually know, are you good at macro or micro? I just know you got a C or a B or an A or whatever it is. So what the competency-based education network and skills-based education looks to do is change that. So some of the most famous schools doing this is like Western Governors University. And the idea here is it's not about finishing 16 weeks. It's about finishing pieces that you need to get to where you want to go. And I think this is a really big shift because what it does is it unlocks time and geography. So right now, I'm not able to engage with the education system if I can't go for, say, 16 weeks straight to finish my degree in general, right? And so what we need to think about is how do we articulate what an education is based on skills rather than on time? And how do we allow people to get those skills, not just from an institution, an academic institution, but from anywhere, right? So this is where Ed3 can really jump in and change our model. The problem that it solves is what's known as the sheepskin effect. So the sheepskin effect, I'll put a link to an article if you want to read more in a podcast I did on it. But the sheepskin effect is this great concept where if you go to 7/8 of a university experience, when you go get a job, you don't get paid 7/8 of a college graduate, right? You get paid for being a college graduate if you get the piece of paper, right? And so what's obviously true, you're not getting all of the knowledge in the last eighth of your college experience, right? You're getting it hopefully across the entire time. But what you're getting paid for, what the employer is paying you for, is the piece of paper or the sheepskin, right? That the value or that the knowledge is written on. And the reason they do that is just it's an easier filter, right? As an employer, I'm not going to go through your transcript and try to understand all the things like what do all these grades mean, right? I basically say, okay, can you finish a degree? That's probably an indicator that you're somewhat hardworking, that you're focused, that you can do these things. And so now I'm going to hire you. And so what competency-based and skills-based education can do is get us away from the sheepskin, where there's off-roads all along the way. So if I learn macroeconomics, and that's all I need for my job, I can show the employer, and now I can get paid whatever that gives me, right? So this provides a huge opportunity, for all of the people who haven't finished education, right? And we know that roughly 40% of people with college or with student loans in the United States don't have a college degree. So there's a huge population of people who don't have the piece of paper that gives them the economic benefit for all the time and money they spent to do that. And so what Ed3 allows us to do is actually accredit these skills. Now that's kind of the big shift. And so there's a lot of people working on this. One of the communities I'm a part of is the IEEE, and they're working on basically a framework for what's called a learner employment record or learner experience record, an LER. So an LER is a way to combine your experiences into one place to get those experiences validated and then be able to own that or share that. So if you think about you as an individual, you have a digital wallet, you can put your experiences into that wallet, and then you can showcase that. And so instead of having to talk to the registrar to get your transcript, you can actually show that you were an Eagle Scout and you have some leadership skills, right? That you did an internship with a research company and you have research methodology skills, that you went to these classes and you got macroeconomics and microeconomics. And so it's opening up this world where skills don't have to come from just the classroom, they can come from anywhere, and then they can get validated through what's called a trust registry. So essentially the person that attests that you know that thing, is that person also trustworthy? So think about it as a better LinkedIn recommendation, right? And that can be shared anywhere because LinkedIn does this, right, to some degree, but it's all on LinkedIn, right? And it's really easy to fake. Anyone can put anything on LinkedIn, whereas these attestations in the Web3 world would be transparent. You could see who gave that attestation, what else have they attested to, and is that person valid, a valid source? So yeah, a validated LinkedIn, exactly. And so one tool that's working on this that I think is really interesting is called OpenSalt. This is an open source project, and what they're doing is essentially breaking down all the tracks in education and putting that to a skill. And so they're starting with K-12 because what's really interesting is K-12 has Common Core, right? And college professors all think that their classes are unique snowflakes that are unlike any other class in the university, right? So it's actually really hard to get a college professor to tell you what are the 5 learning outcomes from this course or what are the 5 skills you get from this course. Whereas in K-12, they're required to essentially hit all of these learning outcomes. So what OpenSalt does is it breaks down these tracks of education into specific learning outcomes. And then you could say, a key learning in 4th grade is learning how to type. I just did a typing test because I was in Code Ninjas and I already have that skill, right? So I don't have to go take that class because I already have that. And then you can see how that expands out. So right now, most of the work has been done in the computer science world, especially in crypto security, so in cybersecurity work. There is frameworks for most of these educations. So in the cybersecurity world, it's called the NICE framework. And that essentially breaks down, if you're going to be a cybersecurity analyst, all the way to kindergarten up, what are the things you learn? What is a password? What is a username? How to turn on a computer? How to type? These are all things you're learning, even though you don't know it, and they're built into your education pathway. And so this is a really interesting and very complex task to break down all of these learnings into these pathways and then allow people to get those skills anywhere. So I think the dream of Web3 is that we can be our own registrar, we can keep track of our experiences, and we can share those with employers. And as an employer, the potential is this is all machine readable. So instead of you sending me a PDF and me having to look through it, I can filter through everybody who has the ability to do cybersecurity, see those people on a list, and if they apply, maybe they go straight to the top, or maybe I even airdrop them some kind of invite, right? Like I can actually send stuff to their wallet to interact with them. So a lot of potential in this world of LERs, and that's kind of the dream of better accreditation when we think about building a better system. Now, when we think about access, we can take this idea of skills based learning and realized that people could learn these skills in a lot of different ways. So one of my favorite examples is the learning economy, and they're working on a project called the Learn Card. And what this does is it actually, their first use case is with migrant communities, so mostly refugees. And it says, how do we get these refugees to learn the skills they need to get jobs in their new homes? So one of the countries that they're focused on initially is in Italy. And a lot of people have migrated to Italy from Syria, from the Middle East, from Afghanistan as well. And even before they come to Italy in the refugee camp, they can show them what are the things that you need to learn to work in the high demand fields in Italy. So this could be, plumbers, electricians, computer scientists, and what they've built is the Learn Card is a physical card the refugees get, and they're paid in cryptocurrency as they complete those tasks. So they can actually spend time learning because they're getting paid to learn. And as they learn those skills, they qualify for job opportunities. So I learn Italian 101, right? Because I'm in this new country, I need to speak basic Italian. I need to learn JavaScript, and now I can work as a web developer. I can validate that on my LER, on the blockchain. And now the employers can see all of the students who have completed this task, and they can hire them. 87% of these refugees who are getting hired are sticking on past 6 months with their employers. So it's becoming a pathway to opportunity, right? So this is a kind of the world where when we think about accessibility, there's a huge potential to give people classes to count for what they already have. And we know one of the big issues, if you've gotten in an Uber in the United States, you've probably talked to someone who was an electrical engineer in Syria, right? And now they're driving a taxi because no one understands what school they went to. Or if you think about labor shortage, like in North Dakota, huge labor shortage, how could I hire someone remotely and trust that they have the skills I need? I don't know what the university in the Philippines is called. I don't know if that's a real school when they tell me they got a computer science degree. But if they can validate what they've done, I feel more comfortable hiring them. And that's the power of this kind of better accreditation, is that it's not an A or a B, it's actually proof of work, right? I can see the project you've done or the paper you've written or the thing you've built. I can make it more accessible for anyone in the world. And I think this is becoming really interesting when we start thinking of the future of AI and how does artificial intelligence come to play. So one of the projects I'm really fascinated right now is called the Proof of Learn Protocol. So a gentleman named Bodo Honen is doing this, where essentially his idea is that learners are teachers. And so he started in East Africa almost a decade ago in Zanzibar with young women. And what he found is that they don't have, the teachers that want to teach the skills these girls wanted to learn. And so if they were able to get one or two of them to learn it online through YouTube, through classes, then that girl would teach their friends. And so he built this entire protocol that essentially goes through YouTube in select areas. So he's starting with Web3 knowledge because it's kind of a fast moving field. And people can get points for watching that video, and then they get additional points for teaching someone else. So basically creating a regenerative system where one person is the learner, then they become the teacher, and to move forward, they actually have to teach other people. And we know, Richard Feynman's famous quote, the best way to learn something is to teach it. That's kind of the concept here. And so I think this is a really fascinating world where we start saying, okay, and we know there's a massive teacher shortage around the world in places where we don't have educators. How do we seed information? And maybe how do we recommend what someone should do based on where they want to go? So instead of saying, here's the path that we say you have to take, K-12, you flip it and say, hey, you want to be an electrician, you want to be a computer scientist, you want to be a cyber analyst, whatever it might be, work backwards. And here's the things you need to learn, right? And here's how you get there. So you start to build more like Google Maps approach to learning pathways instead of like a subway map, where there's lots of opportunities, lots of options. You might take a slower path, you might take a more direct path rather than there's one opportunity. So I think that's a really interesting approach. And when we start thinking about accessibility and moving into affordability, that's where that really can change things. Because if anyone can become a teacher and if we can seed knowledge, there's not going to be as expensive of learning. Anyone has access to learning. With affordability, I think the concept that I find most powerful is Balajai's quote that live is a luxury good. And so when you think about anything that you do synchronously or live, that is a huge investment of time and resources. And as a business, this has changed dramatically, where we're going to only have in-person meetings or fly somewhere on a business trip when it's really important. And we want to show that person that it's really valuable. And this kind of goes back to Mouse, right? Like there is value to showing up and saying like, you're worth a day and a half and a hotel stay, right? But for most of us, we don't need live, right? We don't need that luxury good. There's ways to use things like the learning protocol to make it work. And so I think that that will really affect kind of the affordability of the future. So really excited about some of these projects and what it could mean. I think the last idea, just to kind of touch on that, is the opportunity this might mean for competition as we think about cost and affordability. Right now, universities have brands, right? And you go to them because you get the brand name. So what happens when I don't need the brand name because I can trust people will hire me because I can show my skill, right? So this is just a little pivot, but I think it's a really important one where I want to go to a school now that people recognize the name, because most likely they're just going to look at my PDF, see what school I went to and be like, yep, that's a good school. They finished. It's good enough, right? But if I can get those skills anywhere, the brand name might not matter as much. And that's going to be a really interesting change. If you're in higher ed, you know about the demographic cliff coming. So basically fewer babies were born in the Great Recession in 2008. So if you do the math, by about 2025, 2026, there's going to be a 5 to 10% drop in college students just because there's fewer kids, right? And most of these universities are already seeing big enrollment declines just from there's low unemployment and people questioning values. So there's going to be a big crunch, right? There already is. And what I'm seeing, having been in the system a little bit, is those flagships are doing well because they're going deeper into their wait list. And the students who maybe were going to go to North Dakota State, where I taught, are now going to go to the University of Minnesota or the University of Michigan, where they're on the wait list. North Dakota State's going to dig into that wait list a little bit. And those people who maybe were going to go to the community college or a smaller school now just don't have anyone, right? So I think you're going to see kind of a flight towards top brand names. And then you're going to see this other kind of side of the bell curve where people are just going to get skills wherever they can, build their own path. I think it's going to be a really interesting change. And so one thing that might speed this is as more education goes on chain, and we just saw the University of Nicosia, which is in Cyprus, they just launched the first completely on-chain college course taught by Punk, what's his number, 6359 or whatever it is. So over 10,000 people signed up in the first week. But what's interesting there is if I want to attract students, I can see everyone who registered for that class, right? It's all on the blockchain, at least their wallets. And I could encourage those students to come to my class or come to my university or come to my alumni event, right? And so we actually have more transparency into finding people who are the right students for our classes. So I think that could actually unlock competition between learning institutions, whether traditional or non-traditional. I call this the airdropped university, because essentially you could airdrop tokens to anyone who studied at this other program and say, hey, you can come get more learning here, or you can come to our speaker event because you have a background in green energy, or we're going to give you a token to invest in our class or whatever it might be. So will be really interesting to kind of see how that goes. So I'll just kind of leave that one there. It's sort of interesting space I'm watching. So we talked a lot there about accreditation, affordability, accessibility. So let's talk real quick about opportunity. One of the reasons I think Web3 has a place in the education system is because it's skills that our students can actually use to get jobs, right? So if you believe the purpose of education is, say, human flourishing or creating opportunity, I think Web3 should be in your class because essentially you're teaching jobs for the future, right? And it's not something that's difficult. I had a chance to teach Web3 to a 5th grade classroom in India, the Shinshaya Jagasi Academy, it was called. And it was so fun because it was this group of 5th grade students, super energetic, their parents in the background setting up Zoom and stuff like that. And what we did was we taught them to open up a wallet. We got about $500 or so of donations. We sold an NFT about the project and people bought the NFT, and then we used that money to help them buy an ENS domain. So they all got their own domain with their digital wallet. And then we used Canva to show them how to design a POAP, which is essentially an NFT graphic for a specific event. And so as they went through this 4-lecture class, that was an hour each, so 4 hours total, they got a POAP for each step, right? So they could show off to their classmates that they had a POAP. So the kids, yeah, great question, Melinda. The kids loved it, mostly because they were doing something on the computer and super, futuristic. And it was fun because, the kids had to get permission from their parents. I think most of the kids or families that signed up had parents who were interested themselves. So we saw a lot of parents like looking over the shoulder, learning about Web3. And so I think there's this interest, and this is, if you're a digital native, it's not that weird, right? Like it's something that they get. And what we told them is that now you can design a POAP and you have an ETH address. people can hire you, right? So we sent out that list of ETH addresses. We said, these students can create POAPs for you, and it's something that you should look into. So I think it was just an interesting use case of like, these are skills that people will need. And as we kind of go older, between 5th and 8th grade, there's a really interesting project going underway between the Learning Economy and the Lego Foundation called Super Skills. And essentially what they've done is they built a mobile app. It's a game. And in the game, you learn skills. Students create a temporary wallet. And as they complete the game and learn those skills, they actually get credit for learning those skills. So what's called a verifiable credential. So it's basically a type of credential that isn't on chain unless you want it to be. So they have control over whether they share it or not. And the wallet is not something that they're going to keep the rest of their life. So it's something that could be used in the classroom. So this was basically a use case to see, could we create digital wallets that are open source, that are used temporarily in the classroom, and get students to learn something that they could take the knowledge with them, right? So the wallet's here, they learn it, the wallet goes away, but they keep that credential. It then shows that they have 5th grade reading level, because they have to read stuff to get through the quest, right? And they have to have critical thinking. So they have to have critical thinking to like battle these, zombies in this show or in this game. So really interesting project that I think shows a little potential of kind of a younger age. As you get older, there's a lot of ways to teach in the classroom and to give people jobs. So I had a chance to teach at the University of Texas at Austin, and in 1 hour, we basically got students jobs in Web3. So what we did was we did crash course on opening up a wallet, which was new to 95% of them, right? And then we showed them how with a wallet, you can go find bounties in areas that you already know. And so one of the sites that we use for that is called dwork.xyz, which is just a bounty board. So essentially a way to find bounties. And there's a lot of Web3 job boards popping up. Coinbase Learn is a really easy one to get people started on just seeing how they can earn money by learning. And Gitcoin has a lot of interesting projects, but we basically had these students go on dwork, find tasks that they could do, and then sign up for them. And, I don't know if many of them will follow through, right? But what we wanted to show them is how you have the opportunity right now to work. You don't have to wait until you have the sheepskin, right? Like you can start now building a portfolio. And just that concept of agency that we want to build in those students, and that you don't have to wait for permission, right? You can embrace your weirdness, go do that graphic design project, go do that research project, go do whatever it might be to get started. And now you have a way to get paid regardless of where in the world you live or where in the world the company is. So I think as educators, it's important for us to keep an eye on the market. Like I think we need to teach skills that actually prepare students for what's coming. And if you believe that Web3 is going to play some role in this world, I think it's important to teach them. At minimum, showing students, especially in other countries, that outside the US, that they can get paid regardless of where they live is incredibly freeing. And it really shows, I can live in Fargo, or I can live in Mumbai, or I can live in New Zealand and still work with these really cool companies and get paid. So I think there's a big opportunity for just teaching students a little bit. It's going to be incumbent on them to actually pursue and go deeper, but at least give them the picks and the shovels to start the work, right? Show them they need a wallet, show them where they can find jobs, and then see what they do. I think we underestimate our students oftentimes. So I'd rather give them the chance to go out there and build. So those are a few things I wanted to highlight. I think Web3 doesn't have to be the end in itself. I think it's really can be a tool for opportunity, it can be a tool for a better education system. It can be a tool for just teaching concepts that our students need to know. And maybe it is an end in itself at the end of the day. So as you use these tools to teach them, students might get interested and go deeper and become entrepreneurs, become degens, become whatever it might be. But I don't think that's the purpose, right? I think if our goal with Web3 is to build a sustainable future, to create human flourishing, we're trying to give these students what they need to do that. And Web3 just lets us do that in a more accessible way, a more affordable way, a better accredited way. So I'm really excited about this future. And I'm really excited to have conversations now with you about other ways this might be implemented and how CityDAO plays a role. I think we want to point to people that are building the future and showing students that you don't need permission, that you can be the one creating what the future looks like is really exciting. And showing them how they can join these DAOs is a great way to get them started. So thanks for listening to my short rant on Ed3. As as David mentioned, I write at ed3.gg. And so that's a place where if you want to kind of explore some of these crazy ideas, I write frequently there. You can subscribe. And I also have a podcast where I talk to builders in the space. So people who are kind of building this future. So that's another great place to check out. So yeah, I'd love to open it up, turn it over to you guys and see what jumped out, what you think needs further development, and see how I can help. So thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was so informative and inspirational. Really appreciate all you had to say. And it's just great to have you here and to be able to work together and to connect with you, since what you're doing is such great work. We have a few minutes if anybody wanted to ask any particular questions, maybe 5 minutes or so. Feel free to just unmute or raise your hand as you see fit.
Yeah, Melinda had a great question about teaching. I love doing guest lectures. So if you are in the classroom or you know someone in the classroom, like let me know. I'd love to zoom in and do the 1 hour Web3 crash course, you know. So or talk to you about it or get you into the educators curriculum so you can do it yourself.
That's an amazing offer. Thank you.
Yeah, that was just such a great talk. And actually it's so related to some of my thinking. And actually I'm going to present something after that crosses over so much with all the things you're saying. So it's yeah, great stuff. I'm really going to deep dive into all those links you sent. Anyway, I'm super interested in all this stuff.
Yeah, no, that's great. And Mike had a great question on the open badge movement. Yeah, this is very much a part of the open badge movement. So if you're familiar with open badges or Badger, kind of a lot of these sites, they've been around for a decade looking at how do you badge. And a lot of these are thought of as micro credentials. IBM's been a big adopter. Open badges 3.0 is now a verifiable credential standard. So verifiable credentials was just recently passed by the W3C as like the standard people should use. Verifiable credentials is essentially the idea that it just standardizes all the information and then you can decide if you want to put that on chain or not. So if you get an open badge, you're getting a verifiable credential. And I think what we're looking at now is how are a lot of the badge providers, so like the Accreditables, the Credleys, et cetera, how do they start building their badges in a way that also are meet the open badge standard or meet the W3C standard? So there's a lot of push there. The big challenge in my mind is the flip. Like, how are employers going to understand and accept these things, right? I think you'll see it first in non-traditional or like Web3 companies because they understand, they're able to trust people who have projects. And then you'll see it in the areas with high demand. So if I really need a web developer, I'm going to be more willing to look at like what an open badge looks like. So it'll be interesting to see how that shifts. There's an organization called Jobs for the Future, JFF, that's working a lot on this. Walmart Family Foundation's putting a lot of money into this. So there's some big names like trying to figure it out because they need talent, right? So it's not just open badges for super high technical talent, but also, you know, how can I prove that I have the mobility to work in this job, or I have the strength, or I have, you know, all of these kind of questions that someone like a Walmart or Amazon might want to. So yeah, really interesting. Great question, Mike. And everyone should go to Scott's session.
Right. Well, speaking of that, I'm sorry to have to cut us short on this opening session. It's been a fantastic start to day 2 of the conference. Thank you so much. But we will have to move on to our next presentation. Of course, feel free, everybody, you know, stay on, and I'll jump right to the next one. So I'd like to introduce another Scott. This is Scott Oriat from, I think I'm saying your last name right, Oriat, from CityDAO. And he is going to present. Now, for the next part of our conference, we have 5 different presentations. And so for each one, the plan is just like a conference, there'll be 10 minutes to present, and then about 5 minutes for questions or comments. So for each speaker, I will give a 2-minute warning on the chat, and maybe I'll just hold up my fingers in the peace sign for 2 minutes when you get to that point. So feel free, Scott, to take it away. Scott, you're muted.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I couldn't have a better setup than that talk, Scott. It's kind of a short little piece I wrote, and it overlaps with so much of what you just said. Yesterday, David Staley actually mentioned in just the chat, he was like, education's all reputation. And you used the word brand, and I use the word trust a lot. And it's just really interesting thing that what you're actually really trying to do is get to people who have more trust in a Web3 educational system. So I'm actually just going to read my article. Usually I don't do this, but it's short and it takes about 10 minutes to read. So if it sounds like I'm just reading something, that's what I'm doing. So anyway, here we go. Education's last mile. Why education needs Web3 and how to turn lemons into lemonade. Education is a building block of human flourishing, a foundation from which we see innovation and scientific discovery emerge. We all have a desire to understand the world around us. Education provides a key to unlocking this door. In its current Web 2 form, the internet has gifted humanity with historically unparalleled access to knowledge and the ability to acquire skills. The amount of knowledge contained within something as easy to access as Wikipedia would boggle the minds of those who lived in the pre-internet age. Ease at which we can learn basic skills by simply searching YouTube would seem like a superpower to past generations. Other low-cost, high-quality, and easy-to-access online educational resources include Khan Academy, Coursera, and Udemy. Yet, like many things with Web 2, something is missing. In advancing the mission of giving the world access to essential educational tools, Web 2 has gone far, but it can't traverse the last mile of the journey. The education puzzle. Given the ability to access high-quality educational content at a low cost via the internet, one would imagine education is becoming more accessible, cheaper, and improving in quality. However, none of this is true. Globally, education is not accessible, and most children worldwide don't achieve minimal learning standards. According to UNICEF, of roughly 1 billion children and adolescents who go to school every day, over 600 million are unable to reach minimum proficiency levels in reading and mathematics. We also see alarming increases in education costs, particularly when it comes to post-secondary education. According to CNBC, college costs have increased by more than 25% in the last 10 years. Another estimate suggests the price of college degrees in the US has increased 1,200% since 1980. We also see similar increases in primary school costs. However, these costs are mainly reflected in housing prices in neighborhoods close to high-quality schools, making them more challenging to measure. Additionally, administrative costs have soared. Looking at post-secondary expenses in the US, we see that sector-wide per student spending on administration increased by as much as 61% from 1993 to 2007. Finally, measured educational outcomes per dollar spent have seen almost no improvement for decades. The paper, The Productivity Collapse in Schools by E.A. Hanashuk outlines this problem in great detail. While learning tools improve, increases in administrative costs counter these improvements. While educational content costs go down, the cost to administer increases by the same percentage. In economic terms, there's been no increase in productivity. The last mile problem. The last mile problem refers to a situation in goods transportation where the final segment from producer to consumer is the most expensive mile to cover. It is indeed a perplexing and troublesome problem. A product could be produced, ordered, and delivered 99% of the way by utilizing state-of-the-art technologies. Yet, the whole process has no value if the good can't make the final 1% of the journey. In these situations, a huge premium can be offered to anyone who can deliver the goods the remaining distance. Importantly, if someone has a monopoly on the ability to deliver the good the last mile, the premium can be very high. It's a disturbing problem as all cost-saving techniques and technologies utilized in the first 99% of the journey won't reduce the overall price if those delivering the goods the last mile can extract the value. I will argue the above analogy captures education today. While education has improved in unimaginable ways, the price remains high while accessibility is limited given the type of last mile problem. Remains a costly link in education's journey from producers to consumers. To understand the nature of the problem, we need to realize that supplying education has two main components. Education is the process of learning and testing. Learning is complex, but at its most basic level, it can be described as the process of your mind understanding something it didn't before. Testing is a process of verifying that outcome. The testing process involves the accumulation of grades, transcripts, degrees, diplomas, certificates, etc. For the sake of simplicity, I call all these verified credentials. Obtaining verified credentials is education's costly last mile. It's the final step in the process that takes the least time, but this final link explains the high and rising cost of education. Simply, learning is becoming easier and cheaper. Proving you did so is not. But why are verified credentials so valuable? Why can't we just bypass this costly last link? Without information, we get lemons. Verified credentials represent information. In 1970, a branch of economics began that has been broadly termed information economics. In brief, the area of research explores why information is critical for markets to function. The scope of study primarily started with a famous paper titled The Market for Lemons, where the author argued that in markets where it's challenging to verify the quality of products, only low quality products would be supplied. The author used the example of a used car market. A bad used car is called a lemon. The reason is simple enough. If you are a buyer, why would you pay top dollar for something that might be low quality? If you're a seller, why would you bring a top quality item to market if no one will offer you a fair price? Without a trusted method to separate the good from the bad, we only get the bad. The takeaway message is that trusted information regarding quality is critical for markets to function. The outcome is frustrating and not optimal for something like used cars, but it doesn't seem like a massive global issue. The problem is the same logic can be applied to education in the context of labor markets. Learning increases your ability, but if there's no way to prove this took place? The labor market breaks down, and sadly, the inability to verify credentials erodes incentive to learn. Skills are required to access the global labor market. Without the ability to verify skills, the global labor market remains out of reach. The sad reality is that in countries where the educational system isn't trusted, the skills cannot be verified. The labor market will offer a wage in line with the assumption the person isn't skilled. The wage offered doesn't incentivize the accumulation of skills. The incentive is not to acquire them, as acquiring skills takes time and effort. It's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy and an equilibrium that's far from optimal. Verified credentials contain valuable information required for labor markets. You can learn for free, and many do, but the reality is you won't get paid for the skills you acquired until you can verify you obtain them. But why can't we just produce more verified credentials? Even if you accept they are required for functioning labor markets, it still doesn't explain their high cost. Top university equals trust. Inherently, the problem is the ability to measure learning has not kept pace with the ability to learn. Our ability to measure learning is stuck in the pre-internet world, even though the ability to learn has leaped into a new age. The former rests on internet technology, while the latter rests on much older and slower evolving technology, networks of trust. In the intro, I mentioned how easy it is to access free educational resources. For example, Harvard, a top university, has a vast collection of recorded classes and materials needed to learn a given subject available for free online. The quality of the free content is very high, allowing you to learn as if you were enrolled in the class. How then is it still possible for Harvard to charge hundreds of thousands of dollars for tuition while turning away people desperate to pay the price? The answer is that Harvard is a trusted verifier of information, mainly that a student who attended and completed their program is highly skilled. When you enter the labor market, it's accepted that credentials from Harvard equate to high skill level. While you can learn for free, the verified credential can only be attained by formally attending Harvard. You need the Harvard stamp or one from another top-ranked university to get out of the lemons market. You don't pay to learn, you pay to verify you learn. Trust equals decentralization. Trusted verified credentials remain in short supply as building trust takes time and rests on systems of checks and balances that are complicated to produce. Why is Harvard so trusted? It might seem disconnected, but it's the same reason democracies are trusted more than dictatorships, and why you can't bribe a judge in a country with a functioning legal system is because they are erected on networks of checks and balances, which is the same as saying they have a degree of decentralization. Problem is that while trust requires checks and power doesn't want to be checked. Centralization doesn't want to be decentralized. It takes a lot of work and time. But what if we don't want to wait? Web3 is an experiment in speedrunning trust networks by building them on code and coalescing trust quickly by aligning ownership and stake with incentives in a decentralized fashion. The goal of Web3 is to replace trust created via social networks with trust vested in code. Can we put verified credentials on the blockchain and bypass the costly last mile? A Web3 solution. Imagine an open test anyone in the world could access that would prove you had a given skill. When you take the test, the individual connects their wallet, verifying the person taking the test is who they say they are. Upon completion and a passing grade, a smart contract is triggered that issues a soul-bound token that you passed the test, a verified credential that is immutable and stored forever on the blockchain. The process is immune to bribery, and cryptography ensures the process isn't fraudulent. The above would be a huge breakthrough and a great starting point. It isn't a complete solution. We would also need to answer the following questions. How do we know the person who developed the test can't just sell the answers beforehand? How do we know the test is a good one? The system still requires incentives to improve the process in a decentralized, trustworthy fashion. A decentralized education system would need to ensure those with a stake in its success can validate and improve the process. Web3 is about ownership. Ownership in a system you want to validate, to build upon, to ensure that what you own retains its value. It's a positive feedback loop. Web3 is speedrunning much of human history using code to coordinate and structure complex social interactions, thus bypassing time-intensive processes by assigning ownership and stake to the right people. Web 2 was built on the ability to transfer information, but it can't solve the trust problem. Supplying verified credentials is supplying valuable information, but trust is inherently difficult to produce. Web 3 can build trust in the base layer. With this potential in mind, Web 3 could change education forever, allowing for the completion of the last mile, ushering in an age where education is low cost, high quality, and accessible to everyone in the world who demands it. In short, Web 3 equals trust. So that's what I got.
Thank you very
Any
much.
questions?
Yeah, we have a minute or so. We can open it up if anybody has questions. If not, I will say thank you, since we're a little behind on time, and move to our next presentation. Is Saul Thorin here? No, so maybe Saul Thorin will come in a bit. Then Richard, are you ready to go if we jump forward to you?
Yes, I am. Just give me a second to set up.
So that's not Saul Thorin, that's Chris here, but I think I'm scheduled for 6 p.m. CT.
Right, so we're a little late. So we had Saul Thorin and Richard, and then you, Christopher.
Okay, I
If
see.
that's okay.
Sorry to jump in. I just know, Christopher, you kind of went out of your way to be here because I think you have house guests or something.
Yeah.
So if it's possible, maybe we could jump Chris, if that's okay with Richard, because I know.
Richard,
Yeah, sure,
okay?
that's fine. That's fine.
Okay,
that's fine with it. Yes.
Let's jump forward to Christopher then. So we have Christopher Hill from DeSci Labs, who is going to present on open verifiability towards a more reproducible scientific record. Christopher, would you like to share your screen? Do you want permission?
Yeah, just give me a second. Let me get my slide deck.
So we'll ask you to try to keep it to around 10 minutes. I'll give you a 2-minute warning on the chat, and then we'll have 5 minutes for questions.
Appreciate it. An instant here. There we go.
I see Saul Thorin is joining now.
Oh, 1 second. Sorry, I'm on this new computer. I have a permission problem with Zoom.
Okay. Saul Thorin, hello.
Hello, good morning, good evening.
Hi, Saul Thorin. Why don't you go first? I'll join you later as soon as I fix my little issue here.
Is that okay? Okay, Saul Thorin, we're changing the order a little bit just due to time. And Richard, please let us know if that's a problem.
Sure, you want me to go then?
Yes, if you're ready, we could just jump right to Saul Thorin. So Saul Thorin will do a presentation on building the journal of decentralized work, an applied human coordination experiment. We'll give you about 10 minutes to talk. I'll give you a 2-minute warning on the chat, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for questions.
Awesome. Let me know if you can see my screen. Awesome. So the title of that talk's a bit misleading, given that this is a focus on academic conference. I wanted to focus a bit more on our wider mission and vision and kind of what we're doing, and not necessarily just sort of the product aspect. But for those who don't know, CityDAO is essentially a digital research organization. And we sort of aspire to help build a community-owned academic system consisting of sort of autonomous, fully digital research organizations all over the world. So our challenge today, and kind of how I want to frame today's discussion, is how do you build a global network of digital research education centers that are community-owned, autonomous, and self-sustaining? And we're going to drill down into each one of those 3 points and some of the lessons that I've learned over the last year of trying to do this. What are we trying to accomplish and why? So at the simplest level, I think TalentDAO's mission is to use science to fix DAOs and use DAOs to fix science. And I think that that's like a very simple way to explain what we do. So most of the core team has a background in organizational science and helping sort of traditional organizations build and design both their structures and their processes, but also sort of the psychological side of things, managing talent, keeping people from being burnt out. And we see a huge opportunity in sort of the existing space of DAOs to kind of build on the shoulder of giants and use all the great knowledge that's been experimented and sort of discovered over the last 100 years by organizational psychologists, sociologists, economists. And I think there's like a huge sort of gap in that thinking space with a lot of sort of the DAO thought leadership coming out. Most of it is coming from perspectives of practitioners, which is amazing. I certainly feel like I've learned way more about DAOs after working in DAOs, but I definitely still think there's an opportunity to leverage sort of the traditional scientific body of knowledge. And then on the other side, which is probably more sort of the part that this topic might be interested in, is this notion of like using DAOs to fix science, right? Which is kind of like decentralized science, this concept of DeSci. So how do we use Web3 business models, DAOs, blockchain to sort of fix all the problems in traditional academic settings? So it's kind of that cycle of the two that we really focus on. And another way to kind of talk about our mission is unlocking talent and decentralizing knowledge for the betterment of all. And I'll explain sort of what that means on the next slide. And then there's a handful of core beliefs I always like to stress as anytime I talk about TalentDAO on sort of why we're doing what we're doing. And there's 4 reasons. Like for one, I believe that autonomous working environments should be accessible to everybody. So you may be familiar with concepts like the sovereign worker, agency, all of these concepts that in traditional Western sort of industrialized work environments, like having an autonomous job, getting to work remote, like these are things that are more common, but in many parts of the world, the working models are still very outdated, still very top-down, with little sort of autonomy. I truly do believe that traditional work has failed us. I think DAOs provide a new way forward. I think they make work more fun, more accessible, and more flexible. I think knowledge should be open source. On a related note, there's a huge win that just came out recently in the US. The federal government just announced that any tax-funded research is no longer allowed to be behind a paywall, which is a huge win for many of us in DeSci and for all of us, because we certainly feel that knowledge should not be locked up. It should be available to everybody. So that was made me very happy to see. And then education should be accessible to everyone. So macroeconomists consistently say that one of the biggest predictors of sort of quality of life or your ability to make money in the future is access to education. And there's a lot of different parts of the world that don't have access. So framing this as kind of 2 centralized problems, how do we unlock talent? How do we decentralize knowledge or free the education system? So to unlock talent, we must make entrepreneurship more accessible to all. And this is where I think the powers of DAOs really make this far more feasible. right? I think a lot of people have not pursued entrepreneurship for a series of reasons. Either they're risk averse, it requires capital, it's very capital intensive. Not everybody has that. And then also there's just like, as you try to scale and build a business, the coordination failures and the complexity of coordination increases exponentially. So it's just not really scalable for a lot of people. But DAOs make that a far more easier with the concepts of shared capital. You can have the ability to pool funds. It sort of distributes and decentralizes the risks, right? You can work across multiple DAOs, you can acquire multiple tokens from DAOs, and that sort of makes the process of building a sort of autonomous entrepreneurial business much more feasible. So what you're looking at here is actually data from the US, and it's sort of just to underscore this problem that we're seeing. So since the mid-1970s, the growth in productivity relative to compensation, as you can see there, is just very inconsistent. Are seeing a time in our lives where we're more productive than ever, both from like an industrial output, GDP, number of patents filed, number of businesses created. We've had pretty much linear growth over the last 30 to 40 years. Despite that, compensation has remained the same. And then sort of to the right here, you see the growth and rise of institutional wealth. So despite your productivity going up over the years, you haven't been paid more, but the gap in income equality continues to rise. So I think that there's like this real barrier to entrepreneurship now that has become really a systemic issue, where if you don't have capital, the ability to tolerate risk, and access to education, like you really don't have the opportunity to have a life that is full of autonomous work and agency. And that's something at Talent DAO that we really believe should not be the case, and that everybody should have that option. So to unlock education, we must make knowledge more accessible to all. So this is the part of our mission that is probably most relevant to sort of design this whole Web3 academic movement. And it's this notion that data, knowledge, all of it should be open source, should be transparent. It should be stored in a way that's immutable, that's fault tolerant, and it should be set up so that it's not solely driven by sort of capitalistic motivations. And what you're seeing here is a couple charts that personally make me very sad. To the left here, you're looking at sort of expenses in education versus learning outcomes. So as you can see, like the more money that countries are spending on school, obviously they have a higher amount of people achieving sort of educational outcomes. It's a negative correlation here because of how the y-axis is set up. So if you read that there, it's kind of hard to see, but it's the share of students reaching none, no, or minimum achievement. So obviously, if you have less resources in your country, there's far more people that aren't able to meet that minimum criteria. And I think what we're doing and what I'm excited about with the idea of Web3 education is that DAOs open up the possibility that your economic opportunities are no longer necessarily limited by your geographic location. And that's a real big game changer for a lot of people. We actually have people on our core team from South America, from Central Europe, from Southeast Asia. I never met them before we started Talent DAO. And they sort of found us, and now we're able to provide grant funding for their research. We've been able to kind of train them and teach them skills that I had to go to grad school for here in the US. And that was all done in a way that's very open source, very decentralized. And I'm very sort of proud of that. And then on the other side, there is, not only learning outcome implications for educational opportunities, but it's your actual democracy itself. So in more educated countries, you're going to see less sort of fascist political regimes. You're going to have more democratic nation states. And that's really important because obviously, if you are living in part of the world where you're scared to go outside because you're under dictatorship, going to grad school is probably not top of mind for you. So it's a problem that's self-perpetuated by a political system that they don't really have control over. And that's another part of DAOs that I believe is really exciting, is this idea that if people can seek out knowledge, they're no longer limited by their geographic location. It may have indirect effects that positively affect and evolve a lot of the world's democracy. And I think we're starting to see this foreshadowed with the concepts of like network states, the concepts of sort of digital nation states. I believe as the world becomes more flat, we'll start to see a global political system that's hopefully far more equitable. So I'm going to give you sort of a handful of very basic lessons I've learned.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but if we could try to keep it to 1 to 2 more minutes, please.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to give you 3 basic lessons I've learned building these research communities so far. Some may be obvious, some may be lessons learned for you, which is great. So the first sort of lesson we've learned in doing this is that community ownership and community management are not the same thing. Members will expect agency of their decisions, but require support on operations. So right now, DAOs are very biased towards people that tolerate ambiguity, that sort of are entrepreneurial, and people that aren't those things don't really do well in DAOs right now. So if we really want to scale this concept, we're going to have to figure out a way to provide the benefits of the DAO while still allowing for structure. And that's something that we found to be challenging that we haven't quite solved for, I don't think yet. Lesson number 2, building autonomous work structures to enable emergent information for groups. So a very practical example of this is if you're going to build a DAO, make sure you have all your processes and your structures and your notions and your Discord, all of that set up before you unleash it to the masses. It's really, really hard to allow these project teams to form without giving them some sort of template or blueprint. And we had to learn that the hard way. And then the last lesson is self-sustaining business models for decentralized research is still TBD. Grant funding in Web3 and DAOs are far more efficient than traditional academic grants, but I don't think we have sort of come up with a valid self-sustaining business model in Web3 for academia just yet. So what have we done so far? There's sort of 3 things. We built a global community of hundreds of individuals excited about the future of education. We've organized and supported 8 autonomous research projects so far. And then we've secured and distributed almost $100,000 of grant funding to independent researchers and students all over the world. So where we're going with this is we're going to continue to do these things. We're building some infrastructure that makes it possible for us to run an institute. And we're partnering with groups like some of you on the call today to hopefully build this out and scale it further. You can learn more about us through that link. It's got all of our different studies and our websites. And then we have our Gitcoin page up, which is very exciting. There's a DeSci round for Grant 15 round. So that's very cool. And yeah, happy to answer any questions about what we're doing. I see some things in the chat.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure we have time though. We're a whole presentation behind. So we might have to just jump to the next one unless there's a very short, there was one question in the chat, maybe like a 1-minute answer, but I'd really have to cut you off after that.
Let's see. Tolerating ambiguity is an unspoken requirement for DAO membership. What do you attribute that to? That is a very tricky question to answer in under 1 minute. I think it will come down to there is not a standardization of a DAO operating model in the most basic sense for 90% of the population in the world. to feel comfortable jumping into a DAO. And I think there's a huge barrier to technology too. So a lot of the people I've converted into the DAO life came from my sort of professional Web2 network. And the biggest barrier to entry is Discord. That is the most overwhelming thing to show anybody for the very first time. So I think right now there's a certain demographic that's being attracted to DAOs, and I hope to see that expanded. And would love to talk to you more, Melinda, about that.
Thank you so much, Salthorn. I'm really sorry to cut it short. So many people to get to and so many exciting ideas, but I certainly appreciate that presentation you put together with very important information, although, as you said, some of it was in some ways disheartening. But that's what we're all here for, is to improve these things in the future. Next, we should have Richard John. I'm not sure if we could maybe switch that for Christopher Hill, if Christopher is ready, if that's okay with Richard.
Absolutely, no problem. We can do that. Yes.
Appreciate that. So, okay, we'll go with Christopher Hill then from DeSci Labs. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to talk about open verifiability. It's quite an advanced topic. I'm not sure what's the level here in terms of people being familiar with the scientific process, but I'm going to give this a shot and compress it in under 10 minutes. So we want to create what DeSci wants to do, DeSci Labs wants to build is structures and systems to create a more reproducible scientific record, which returns the value of curation to scientific society. So what's the status quo right now? So our epistemic commons are under threat. We lived in a society where we had trusted intermediaries, where we had journals that would slowly peer review work. This could take months, even half a year or a year or more, and then it would go to press, to policymakers, and it would then decide the course of history. We saw that this model during the COVID time did not work at all, right? We've had a lot of preprints that were out there full of misinformation that weren't being curated in the right way. And this has led to a lot of info hazards that have been highly damaging. And more generally, the scientific record suffers from this problem, which is the replication crisis, right? So scientific results do not replicate most of the time. And this is a crazy thing to think about. So if you look at Amgen, it's a pharmaceutical company. They tried to replicate 50 of the highest profile scientific discoveries in early cancer treatment. They could only replicate 10% of that. Now, for those of you that don't know what replication means, that means you repeat the experiment that has been presented in a paper to try to get the same results as the original experiment. And failure to replicate is when you cannot get to the same discoveries or same results as the first discovery. And this is a huge problem. There's also exploitative oligopolies that take advantage of scientists, right? They exploit, they take our labor for free. We do peer review for free. We do editorial work for free. We do the entire certification scope of scientific validation. We do this for free, and this needs to stop. What has been the alternative? So right now we have a direct model. So we go from preprint platforms. This is where scientific put their early work before peer review, and this goes straight to social media. That's not a good model either, because the info hazards there are very, very common. And when they do happen, it can create a lot of harm. So what's the third path? The third path we're trying to create is this path we call DeSci. This is a way to allow scientific communities to essentially verify scientific work, scientific preprints, to do that certification process and to return value to scientific societies away from these oligopolies of scientific publishers. So what's the DeSci vision? So the DeSci vision we're proposing, of course, DeSci is a vast space. There's a lot of things happening in DeSci, but what we're really focused on is first of all, access and archival. We want to move away from this notion of cloud silos that erect paywalls that keep our work behind closed doors, that exploit our labor for free. And we want to move towards peer-to-peer gateways. We want to move towards networks that essentially access an open state repository that creates fair and accessible knowledge graphs. We want to move the version of record. This is very important. The version of record is the final form of a PDF, a final form of an article that is held by a publisher. We want to move the version of record away from the PDF of record and towards the reproducible object of record. So for those of you who don't know, research object is essentially a scientific discovery with its manuscript, but also its data, its code, all of the different components that are necessary to reproduce that work from the bottom up. We want to extend the certification scope. It shouldn't be just about certifying PDFs. It should be about verifying research objects. It should be about holistic verification of the scientific record. It shouldn't be simply about verifying text. It should be about looking at code, looking at data, about expanding the scope so that we can be sure that the foundations of knowledge upon which we stand are solid and reproducible. And the value capture. The value capture needs to be brought away from the publishers, this oligopoly that owns 40% of the scientific record, which essentially has profit margins that are higher than Pfizer, higher than Apple, higher than Google. It's a monopoly. And they're taking our labor for free, and we're just accepting it. This has to change. We want to make it that scientific societies can reclaim the value that's done by curating science. So what does it mean? I'm going to go a bit into details here. What does it mean being published, right? For those of you who've never published a paper, what does it mean? Well, published, a paper which has been published has a set of attributes that has been verified. Typically, it's like, well, the conclusions are supported by the data, right? This is the first thing. This is called scientific soundness. That means that the scientific method has been rigorously applied, that the conclusions are supported by the data. The second part about curation is so-called impact prediction, meaning given your conclusion, how important are them for other scientists, right? What's the expected impact of a scientific discovery? And this is why you have glamorous journals like Science, Nature, Cell Press, all of these top journals that are essentially there gating access to publication through novelty on top of the verification for scientific soundness. And publishing in these types of journal in open access, I don't know if you know, but having a paper in open access in a Nature journal costs about $10,000, right? 9,000 euros to have your work for free, peer-reviewed for free, that your colleagues peer-review for free, that are then pushed by this publisher who does typesetting and coordinates the peer review, and he'll send you a bill for 9,000 euros. That's the current status quo. Why? Because scientists are stuck in a prestige game, and they cannot escape. Everyone needs to play that game. That's the only way you're going to get grant money for funders. And so we have these exploitative oligopolies that are essentially capturing our mechanisms of selection and of prestige generation. So what do we need to do? We need to unbundle the peer review process. We need to break it down into its bare minimal components. What does it mean to be peer review? Well, it means a couple of things. It means, well, your work is sound. There's journals that actually verify reproducibility. There's only one that I know. It's called the American Economic Review. That's the top journal in economics. This is what decides the policy at the Fed. These guys will literally reproduce your results and have an army of undergraduates that do that. So that means much more than simply being published in Cell or Nature, right? I mean, your work's actually reproducible. But these attributes are implicit. We don't know that they happen. We need to break this down. So our idea is really to take these attributes, what it means to be scientific, to be published in a scientific journal, and break it down with their minimal attributes, to unbundle the process. And we've had organizations like the Open Science Foundation, like the Association for Computing Machineries, that came up with this brilliant idea, which is called badging, right? The idea of badging is you can take a paper and you can say, well, the data of that paper is open access. Here is a badge, right? This is an attribute. This paper is reproducible. Here's an attribute that tracks reproducibility. This paper has its artifacts available that are of high quality that other can reuse. This is a badge that I'll give to you, right? So all of this is a very interesting effort that has been working very well with scientists. The idea is you can unbundle the process of quality and certification into its minimal viable components. So what we want to do with DSci and its open verifiability is twofold. First of all, we want to make it that the scientific record can be verified by anyone. And by that, I do not mean that anyone has the skill to verify a piece of scientific research. I mean that anyone should be able to put a validation grant on a piece of published research. Meaning I see a preprint that comes up, it talks about, some HIV insert in COVID. I'm skeptical about that, but if it's, big if true, right? And big if true means I need an answer. Is this reliable knowledge I can stand on? And I need this answer fast. And I need to essentially want to be able to put a validation grant, put, an Ethereum or two, or put another form of incentive and select a scientific society that could do that verification process so that they could be reclaiming the value of the scientific validation. So you can imagine now, if you've broken down what it means to be published in all its integral parts, you can have a plethora of attributes that could accompany published research. You could have things like the author's identity is verified and there's no plagiarism, right? You'd call that the basics. You'd have things like, well, the data is restrained access. Not anyone can access the data because it's human data, but there's a path to accessing that data, and that path has been made clear such that others can reproduce it, such that others can verify it. It means that you might have a badge that says the results are reproducible. I added a Juniper notebook and you can reproduce my results line by line. Well, that's worth a lot, but currently it's barely recognized in the scientific publishing environment. People don't even pay heed to it. It's like, oh, it hasn't been published in Nature, it's not worth my time. Well, look, man, my results are reproducible line by line. That is going above the call of duty, and this is what we need more people to do. So essentially, this is the idea. We want to break down what it means to be published in its minimal composable attributes, and essentially create a system where scientists can build these research objects, can combine preprints with their artifacts, with their code, with their video presentations, with their data set, bring all of this in one space in what we call an open state repository. So what does it mean to be open state? Open state is this idea that anyone has immutable access to the underlying content of this repository, and there's no paywall I can erect, and there's no API I can cut off. How do you do that? You take this knowledge graph, this scientific discovery, you store it on a ledger, and you have the rest of that information that has been indexed on the ledger, the root hash, and you put that on content address storage system like IPFS. And at this very moment, you have a fully verifiable trace that is completely open state. Nobody will ever be able to put a paywall on it, and no one will ever be able to shut down an API. And that's a space that scientists can truly own, where their research is accompanied by verifiable attributes that are markers of quality, that allow others to understand the trustworthiness of their results, and that return the value of curation to scientific societies. Thank you.
Thank you. Somebody give that man a drink. Okay, I did see we had one question. I mean, just, we only have a minute or so, but I believe somebody said, I think it was Melinda said, what is a knowledge graph? You had referred to that term a couple times.
Sure. So we talk a lot, scientists, they publish PDFs, right? That's what we do. There's many reasons why we publish PDF. One of them is that it's the vector of freedom, right? PDFs have allowed us to self-publish. They've allowed us to set up preprint platforms. They've allowed us to bypass the oligopoly of publishers. And it's also very simple to make. The big problem with PDFs is that they're fundamentally static documents. They don't contain your data, your code. They don't contain any of your artifacts. So now a knowledge graph, the idea of a knowledge graph is, how about we could create an immutable linked data structure where we would not only have the PDF of the research, but also the data, the code, perhaps a YouTube presentation that you gave at a conference. You could have all of these different artifacts that would be together into an immutable knowledge graph that could then be shared with your colleagues across the world. That's the idea of a knowledge graph.
Thank you. Well, that is fantastic. Are there any other last questions? Sorry to rush through it, but great presentations.
Yeah, I try to go as fast as possible. I know you guys are behind time here.
Great job. You did exactly 10 minutes. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Christopher. Our next presentation is Richard John from In Holland University on the blockchain miner and the DAO program. You ready, Richard?
Yes, I am. Let me just share my screen.
Great.
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
All right, perfect. All right. Yes, I want to thank both Scott and David for the opportunity to give a brief presentation of our business innovation program in Holland. I'm a lecturer in business innovation. I teach design thinking and other innovation related courses at the university. And the reason why I was asked to give a brief talk is because we have a very hands-on, a very market-oriented approach towards teaching. And I think it would be of interest to share it here. And also how we're using this approach to teach students all about blockchain. And what I decided to do is to take a student introduction slide deck and an abbreviated version to introduce our course. And after that, I'll have some slides on our collaboration with CityDAO. So I'll go briefly into what is innovation according to us, our philosophy, how BI works, some of the skill set, and then also the CityDAO collaboration. So, yes, so if you look at the word innovation, it's becoming quite of a buzzword, and it covers a real broad scope of skills that are necessary to bring product and service to the market successfully. And you see all these different roles are coming available that you can apply for after you graduate as a student. But what does it mean for us as we educate these students to become business innovator? So what we're looking for is a process that helps students to come up with future-proof solutions to change business and society for the better. And since many of you have a technical background, I do believe that you're familiar with the terms incremental, medium, and radical innovation. And what we try to instill in students is a mindset, a way of working that allows them to be able to innovate either from incremental, being these examples of, for instance, a luggage cage and being able to add wheels to make it easier to use, or improving the economics of a office chair, for instance, which could be considered incremental innovation, to more medium-oriented innovation, which is all about adapting business so it becomes more sustainable or more societally responsible. But we're also looking into how can you do radical innovation, right, and come up with new ways of actually communicating with people. In short, so we're all about creating students that are able to lead the change. We're all about teaching students their own way, their own approach of being change makers. And for this reason, we try to attract students that want to take on the challenge of challenging the status quo. And this is why we focus on diversity, we focus on stepping out of your comfort zone, and also fostering our own way of working as well. And a key thing to our program, so it's an international program, so we have students from all across the world, about 40 different nationalities. And our team of lecturers also consists of lecturers from all across the world. We have students of lecturers from Greece, from the UK, from Canada, from the US. It's all about creating diversity and therefore a unique context which fosters innovation. I see I have 6 minutes left. So in terms of some of our pillars, very quickly. So yeah, our program is really focused on adaptability. Every student becomes their own unique business innovator. And therefore the focus is heavily on personal development, be it communication skills, teamwork, or critical thinking. And an international focus, like I mentioned just now. And very importantly, we work with real life world experience. So we try to work as much as possible with real life use cases, work with actual clients, and give students the opportunity to really just go out there and experience the business world from early on. From the first project, once they join the program, they're basically already working with real companies. An example of how we work, this is a breakdown of how we tackle things for first year students. So we have an approach where we have, for each day we have a different focus. So we have, for instance, Method Monday, where we introduce a certain theory or model. And then the second day on Tuesday, it's all about coming together as a team and experimenting with this methodology or tool that we introduced. Then on the Wednesday, we're asking them to literally go out of the building, approach the client company or approach users and try to experiment with this model. No, and then they come back on Thursday and they try different things to improve their solution, their ideas. Then on Friday, we give them feedback. And how this differs from a more traditional approach is that it's a more hands-on approach. We're not focused on putting students to read books, but it's much more about going out there, actually talking with clients, going out to field trips, doing hands-on brainstorm sessions, etc., etc. So, and now to the nitty-gritty. So how did this collaboration with CityDAO come about? All right. So I've been asked if I could develop a technology-oriented course for the students. And since I had a blockchain background, I thought it would be interesting to pilot a blockchain course with them. So for the last 3 years, we've been developing a blockchain for business course, where we emphasize business approach in order to foster adoption of blockchain solutions. So Windesheim University, a representative of Windesheim is actually also here, was also developing a similar approach. So we said, why not put our heads together and create a collaborative minor program across different universities that could be administered throughout the Netherlands. So, and it's aimed at students with a bachelor background in marketing, design, finance, or business administration. We're specifically not aiming students with a strong IT background. So what does this minor program look like, just briefly? So for the first 3 months, so the ultimate aim is to develop junior blockchain consultants that are able to advise existing blockchain projects on the more business and adoption side of blockchain solutions. And yeah, I'll get back to that in a second. But in the first 3 months, they're getting the basics. So it's an introduction to blockchain for business. For instance, we're introducing them to the blockchain business canvas. We're also introducing them to some basics about how traditional organizations are challenged in transition into a more decentralized approach. We have the DAO fundamentals track, and this is where CityDAO comes in, where we're teaching them all about stakeholder mapping, tokenomics, and governance models for DAOs specifically. And we also have a practical assignments track where they experiment with creating hashes, installing MetaMask, and similar of these small, more assignment-driven tasks. And after these 3 months, they have a basic skill set that they can use on existing or new up-and-coming blockchain or DAO projects. So in this case, we have a collaboration with basically an NGO that's focused on the circular economy, and students are going to try and develop a DAO for them. So first 3 months, get the basics, and then after 3 months, it's go out there, work together with a company, and try to come up with a solution for them. In this case, so for CityDAO, what we're actually aiming for is, so we had a conversation with both David, Scott, and Will from CityDAO. And one of the key challenges that many DAOs are facing is actually getting community onboarded on the right way, and also getting the right engagement or consistent engagement within the community of the DAO. So we said, okay, why not just create this as a challenge for our students? So how can we increase community engagement within CityDAO? No, and they got the challenge is basically to tackle this in 3 different manners. Use your marketing, your design, or a different background to come up with a solution for CityDAO. Use your understanding of incentive models to stimulate this approach that you came up with. No, and also try to really participate, come up with a voting proposal, and see how the community, the existing CityDAO community reacts to your proposal. So again, it's this hands-on approach of learning that we're emphasizing here. And as you can see, so briefly just now, I gave a 5-day approach towards how we do things at BI. And in this case, it's a slightly different approach. What we do is every week they get workshops on some DAO principles. Then we ask them to engage with the CityDAO community and use that as the input to come up with some concepts which you can then test and verify with your community or use as input for next round of workshops. And this is how we guide our students through this process. And some of the workshops are on DAO basics, community engagement, and governance, and token models. I believe I'm over time, but just briefly, and the end deliverables are, at the end, we expect the students after 8 weeks to be able to deliver like a light paper explaining their solution for the CityDAO engagement. We're also expecting them to have a visual representation and infographic of their concept. And we're also asking them to have a 7-minute pitch where they explain their concept in detail. We're asking CityDAO representatives to actually join this pitch and give their feedback to that. And that's about it. So yeah, if you're interested in how we work at the Business Innovation Program, or you're interested in collaborating with us, these are my details. You can also hear some of our students and how they experience working within the BI program. You can try to use this QR code. And I think I'll open up the floor to questions if we have time for that. Yes.
Thank you so much, Richard. And it's a great honor, to have you here and just have CityDAO be participating and cooperating in this. Did anybody have any comments or questions they wanted to throw out? Just take a minute for that. Okay, well then, thank you very much. And we will move on to our final presentation for this section, which is Steve Karam. Please correct me if I'm saying your name wrong.
Karam, close enough.
Okay, Steve Karam, thank you. The founder of Edgenomic, who is presenting on the future of education technology is on chain.
All right, and I'm ready to share once you stop. There we go. All right. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Let me get this going. All right, yeah, so future of education is on chain. So a little bit about me, just very quickly. Edgenomic, it's really something that started as, let's create some education around blockchain. Tired of seeing a lot of the education be, here's how you buy our token. Here's how you, learn more about this currency or whatever else. So created an Edgenomic Academy, mostly to begin teaching, and we have grown beyond that to where we're working on actually building our own EdTech blockchain. The Edgenomic chain is currently in testnet. We are partnering with educational institutions and nonprofits to become validators of this blockchain that's specifically built as a public blockchain for EdTech. As far as the classes, we have taught classes to a variety of different groups. My two favorites were week-long boot camps that we delivered to a group home from Florida, as well as to underprivileged youth on financial literacy and blockchain pitfalls, cryptocurrency, etc. By the end of both of these 5-day camps, we had groups of folks who had barely ever touched a computer, actually creating their own crypto tokens, NFTs, etc., and getting them on chain, which was amazing to see. So I've been in data technology and education technology for a little over 25 years. I've spent the last 10 years leading education teams, both private education teams for software companies and also for higher education. And I've been in blockchain since 2012. I am a tinker, lifelong builder, mad scientist. This guitar I'm playing here, I built it myself, one of my first ever woodworking projects. I built it from scratch. It started as 3 blocks of wood and turned into that. So, all about building new things. So let's talk about that. What I want to talk about is for aspiring entrepreneurs in the space. These two things here, P2P and accreditation, are most commonly what you are going to hear when you say, what's the use case for blockchain and education? What do we hope to solve, or what are the challenges we want to get through? It's almost always around peer-to-peer learning, and accreditation, and how do we keep track of credentials? How do we keep track or badge or, certify or whatever else? But the world of ed tech is vast. It is absolutely humongous. And this is at the corporation level. This is at the higher ed level. This is your kid's preschool level even is like this. There is everything from learning management systems, ERPs, CRMs, SIS, student information systems, EIEIO, along with all of the different things that go around the student experience. Loans, financial aid, financial literacy. We've got faculty management, alumni outreach, getting donations from alumni so you can open the hospital wing at your university. Of course, in the US, there's a large monetary component attached to it, which makes things even more interesting. But from what I've been hearing from all of these different discussions, that concept that knowledge should be open, even if we had the capitalist or the financial will to make all knowledge open, there is a world of technology that needs to be replaced, at least at the institutional level. And it's not just peer-to-peer and accreditation, right? So it really all depends on an outcome we're looking for. I like the way that Saul Thorin put it, that it comes down to, yes, you want open, you want reproducible, but we also need sources that can be trusted as well. So EdTech is a booming industry, and I'm not going to spend too long here because I think we all know it. Education in total, spending on education of some sort or training or any such tech will be a $7 trillion industry by 2025. There are 100 plus education companies with market caps over $1 billion expected by 2025. And then, of course, we know that blockchain is a huge open area that goes far beyond Bitcoin, right? So if you've never seen a Gartner hype cycle, the Gartner hype cycle is, Gartner is a research organization. Their hype cycle for blockchain and Web3 really is showing where things are. And everyone talks about the third one here, but every technology goes through points: the innovation trigger, the peak of inflated expectations, which Web3 is at right now, the trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and then the plateau of productivity. And this is basically highlighting all of the various technologies that make up a larger technology and where they are in the cycle right now. So we see that DAOs, for example, are on their way up the innovation trigger. They haven't reached that peak of inflated expectations. We know that NFTs are starting to fall by the wayside a bit into that trough of disillusionment. And really, this is where you weed out the technologies that can go on into that slope of enlightenment and go forward. My point in showing this is that we know when we're talking blockchain, there's all these technologies that make up the greater whole. But if we look at blockchain itself, I personally believe that we are still at least 5 to 10 years from seeing blockchain as a whole in the mainstream. And when I say in the mainstream, I mean in the corporate eye, I mean in the media eye, beyond what happened with some scam or cryptocurrency, right? I mean seeing ads at San Francisco International Airport. I think we're about 5 to 10 years from software that truly tackles that, which means we're all early. There's a lot of opportunity. So what's holding us back? This is what I think is holding us back. I'm sure there's a lot of beliefs about what's holding us back from true blockchain innovation in the business world and in the larger audience. First off, had to do my personal favorites, which is the kind of errors that you get when you're working with it on the blockchain. Let's not forget just the simple old error of, oops, I accidentally sent someone the gas that I meant to do on a transaction. It went to the wrong address and I have no way to get it back. Things like swapping for tokens and the gas estimations to deploy a smart contract. Things like either scams or failures that lead to immense losses of capital. These are things that are going to hold all of blockchain back, even the more altruistic and scientifically oriented parts. And you can know this by talking to anyone in the IT world and starting to mention things like NFTs, mentioning things like blockchain. And you'll see the immediate visceral reaction, distrust. I recently flew over a colleague from London. It was his first trip to the United States. Young guy, he's a certified teacher out there in London, and he ended up having to go to second processing in customs because he mentioned he was here to teach a cryptocurrency class. They specifically asked him questions in second processing about cryptocurrency and what he's doing here and what assets he has. There is a lot of distrust. So what I want to do, though, is really give some thoughts on, and I'll make this quick, this is the final slide, but give some thoughts on what we should be thinking of as much as we want to see this beautiful decentralized world and this amazing, new disruption take over. There are things that we need to keep in mind to make that happen. And this would be what I'd say for folks who want to become entrepreneurs in the area. One, think bigger than tokens. There's really no use case that one token can have that another token can't have. It's all in the contract in the Web3 app. So, I don't think I have to tell this group, but really it's think bigger than we're going to create a new token. We're going to raise a bunch of capital. We're going to say it has amazing utility. What utility does it truly have is in the app. Focus on data integrations. Like I mentioned, ERP, student information systems, CRMs. It's not just about, hey, let's get data on chain. It's about how do we use on-chain data to the best of its ability, along with all the other data, the data lakes, the business intelligence that we have going on. Focus on data privacy and security. The number of regulations around data are immense. Student information systems are under incredible stress and strain to protect student identities and data. It's not just PII, right? Make it IT staff and student friendly. Actually explain errors, explain how to use it. Don't assume that they understand the facets of smart contracts, Web3, and blockchain. Bridge gaps and build communities. I'm not going to talk about those because we've already heard about those from other speakers better than I could have put, right? Particularly community building. Another big one is don't get tunnel vision. That basically means don't think that blockchain is going to be the end all be all of data storage. It's no better than the people who thought their Oracle database was the end all be all of storage and that NoSQL and other data technologies had no place, right? Blockchain can't solve all problems. It is one data and transactional technology of many. Use the tools that are available to you. And lastly, support is important. We all want to be decentralized, but if to get support when people run into problems, they have to go to a Discord and hope someone answers them and deal with snarky responses and memes, or they got to get onto Telegram, God forbid, right? If that is the only way they can get support for servicing, for example, their student loan through a DeFi app, that is going to lead to catastrophe, and it's going to lead to a lot of distrust. So solving the problem of centralized support in a decentralized application, I believe, is going to be key. And that's all I've got, really, just to talk about the opportunity that's out there, but some of the challenges in the ed tech world.
Thank you so much, Steve.
My pleasure.
I love the final sentence. Was it, God forbid, Telegram?
Oh man, I swear.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes until we got back on schedule. We're at our 1 o'clock stopping point. Were there any final questions or comments right at the end? All right, well then, thank you everybody, and a huge thanks to all of today's presenters. That concludes the morning portion of day 2 of the CityDAO Academic Conference. We're going to take a short break now. I'm going to stop recording in a moment. We will meet in Gather for those people who choose to. That's gather.town. and we'll put the link in the chat. We'll meet there until about 1:30, and we will pick up on our afternoon session at 1:40 back here, same Zoom channel, password, Zoom room number, everything, for 2 panels. One is on K-12 Web3 education, and the second is on the future of higher ed for Web3. And then we will have 2 closing keynote speakers that will be Ryan Foland and Professor Denin, who's a professor of physics and astronomy at UCI. So thank you, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you this afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so